If you were to ask the Ninjago community a long time ago who their favourite of the ninja cast was, there would have been a very good percentage of them that would have answered with Zane. But the thing is, I think that's a little bit different now. Because over the course of the years, of course Ninjago characters will evolve. All of the ninja team that we have are in a very different place now compared to when the show first began, and you can see how each of the ninja progressed, and Zane actually had that quite well for a very good amount of time. But unfortunately, he has seemingly become an impossible character to the writers of the show. And honestly, it's extremely disappointing because one of the original 4 ninja has definitely had a very good amount of issues over the last few years of the show. I would say in particular, it has been a noticeable issue since about 2019. But that is what this video is going to be. I'm going to analyze essentially the downfall of Zane and try and figure out what actually happened when it came to him. Because, in my opinion, Zane, who was initially one of the best characters we've ever had in the show, has slowly but surely become not. And unfortunately, it's very obvious when you look at the evidence. But before I do get to that, let's talk about Zane in his earlier stages, where essentially all of his character was still ahead of him. So if we go back to the pilot, Zane was a very interesting character to see. He was very interesting and different in a lot of the ways he acted and behaved, but he was still very lovable nonetheless, even with all of his little eccentricities. Because little did he know, even though he thought he was just a regular guy, turns out that he was actually a robot built by his father, Dr. Julian, who he didn't even remember. And this was truly the thing that kept Zane held back, because of course in the pilots and in season 1 we saw the ninja try to learn to be ninja and also discovered their true potential, and there was ultimately the one thing that was always holding him back, and the thing is that the fact that he didn't know who he truly was the reason why. But before he even got to that, he did have indications that there was something more to him, because in season 1, for example, we saw him have a very interesting relationship with the Falcon, but in reality, we didn't actually realize what that Falcon truly was. And I will bring up the Falcon later because it actually does have some meaning now. But the thing is that the more he discovered this Falcon, the more he realized more about himself. And that is where he stumbled upon who he truly was. And it really did shake him to his core, because he must have doubted everything he was, everything he stood for, whether or not he was real in a lot of different ways. Because even though he was a robot, he was very human. And he was a very deeply human in a lot of ways. He still had emotion. He could still be happy, he could still be sad, he could still do everything that a human was. But the mechanical nature of Zane was always something that was interesting to have in that equation. But he actually came to embrace it. He became to embrace who he truly was. And when he realized who he was, who his father was, his backstory, where he came from, he realized that even though he was a robot, he was still Zane. And ultimately, that is the way he learned his true potential, because he accepted who he was, and he realized that no matter what it was, he still had his brothers to back him up. And honestly, the episode where all this comes to be, which is TikTok, is honestly one of the best episodes because of it. But Zane, by all account, was interesting and one of the most emotionally in-depth characters we actually had, because even though he again had that mechanical nature to him, he still had his compassion, his love, his dignity, everything that made Zane very human, and it was very interesting to actually see that. And this ultimately culminated in season 3 rebooted, where the ninja who were facing up against the Overlord or the Golden Master were ultimately losing, and they didn't exactly know what to do. But Zane did, and he did what he was always told to do, which was protect those who could not protect themselves. So in one of the most powerful scenes that we've ever had in Ninjago history, he sacrificed himself for his brothers, his family, and the people of Ninjago. And one of the most emotional scenes is honestly really interesting to see, because this proved once and for all that Zane, in all of his moments, all of his progression, even though he learned he was a robot, he realized that ultimately speaking, he was able to still have the emotions, the mannerisms, the life of a human. And the fact that he was still able to do that was something incredible to see. The only other thing from this phase that you probably should mention is that even though we've established that Zane was able to learn emotion, even though he didn't really need to because he already had it, he learned how to be human by all accounts. And one of the biggest things that actually come from this fact is that Zane was capable of loving someone. And of course, he loved his brothers, he loved his family, of course, but he met Pixel another Nindroid. And the fact is that beyond any sort of realization, one robot was able to fall in love with another. And again, it proves, ultimately speaking, that Zane was one of the most human of the actual bunch. But this actually moves us on then to kind of the next phase of Zane in of himself, because this was where Zane obviously rebuilt himself into the Titanium Ninja, and things changed at that point in time, because before then, it was Zane accepting who he was, it was Zane accepting that he was not human, but he was potentially one of the most human of the lot. But the thing is that once he rebuilt himself, it became something very different. Season 4 honestly had a lot of promise in a lot of different ways, because when Zane rebuilt himself, he had to kind of understand that he was still himself, because he says himself that he is no longer the White Ninja. He said he was a replica. He said he was not the person who sacrificed himself the season before, and by all accounts he very clearly had an identity crisis. But with the help of Pixel, with the help of Cole, the rest of the ninja, he realized that by all accounts, he was still the same Zane that sacrificed himself to the Overlord. It was just a different look of a body, and we get to see Zane come to understand himself, come to appreciate himself again, come to realize that he is truly still the person that he was. And we got to see him adapt with this new body, we got to see a lot of cool gimmicks with the body, he had a lot of cool moments with the body, and now with Pixel in his head, he definitely became more upgraded, as he said himself. But this season 4 plotline kind of just vanished after season 4. The thing is that afterwards, Zane just being the Titanium Ninja didn't really get touched on all too much. Zane didn't really use much of his cool abilities after the fact, like the exploding shurikens for example, would be really helpful in a lot of different situations, but unfortunately he just never actually finds himself using it. He just kind of became Zane again with Pixel in his head, and this was kind of the first instance where people noticed a difference. But by all accounts he was still Zane, but in the ironic sense, he kind of just started acting more robotic. He didn't really act as human as he did before. He still expressed emotion, but the thing is that he didn't really express it as much as he used to. The other thing is that he didn't really express much more when it came to Pixel either. I mean, the only instance from season 5 through till season 7, which is what I consider to be this next stage of Zane, he only really has one acknowledgement of him and Pixel having an actual relationship, which was in season 6, where Pixel remarks that no one touches her Nindroid, and even then it's a bit loose at best. The thing is that Pixel and Zane's relationship becomes kind of strained, and it's honestly just kind of a shame to see. But the thing is that ultimately Zane just become almost less and less, but Zane was definitely still there. I guess the best way to put it is that Zane ultimately became just a bit static. I don't know how else to really put it. He wasn't really downfalling, but he also wasn't really coming up at the exact same time. He was just in this one little isolated zone where he just didn't really have much else to do. And that then leads us into the third of the 4 stages of Zane. And this stage, in my opinion, is where Zane really starts to kind of just go behind the sidelines. Because saying he's on the sidelines is honestly kind of generous at that point. Because as of season 8, I mean, he had his whole Snake Jaguar thing, but that is also very short-lived. But apart from that, Zane just never really gets any moments. He obviously never really becomes the center of the plot again, and I will cover the Ice chapter in a minute. But the thing is that he never really has any instance of emotion, he never really has any sort of instance of realization, anything at all really. It's difficult to really put it. He just rarely actually has any movement in the plot itself. I mean, in season 8 where Pixel makes a return, they share a hug and they share a scene where they talk about whether or not Pixel should go back inside of his head, but the plot itself doesn't really have any sort of relevance. There's not really much moments between the two of them actually when they're able to see each other physically once more. That's kind of the case for the Oni trilogy in general. The thing is that Zane just doesn't really have a moment in the Oni trilogy apart from the reunite with Pixel. He maybe serves the plot once or twice, but other than that, he never really does much, generally speaking. I would honestly be very inclined for you to point out something that he actually does in the Oni trilogy, which is not reunite with Pixel and does the Snake Jaguar thing. But the thing is that it kind of just gets worse from there, because then you go to the Wild Brain era, where you get the Ice Emperor. And the thing is that the Ice Emperor should have been Zane's big arc. It should have been the thing that drove Zane for years to come. But ultimately, it didn't. Zane becoming the Ice Emperor should have been something very big, and ultimately it quite literally doesn't, because the Ice chapter is something that is portrayed as the Zane season, whereas we very barely actually get to see Zane. And ultimately, that's the reason why it's not really a season, but at the same time, they try to make it. But the Ice Emperor plotline is something that kind of just gets completely assassinated by all costs. And the thing is that once he actually is able to shake away the corruption that Vex put onto him, the fact is that it has absolutely no bearing on Zane from that point onwards. He was an emperor for decades by all accounts. We know for a fact that he was the Ice Emperor for a very long time, and he also held the Staff of Forbidden Spinjitzu for a very long time. And the fact that all of these different aspects had absolutely no impact on Zane is honestly really weird to see. This should have been the moment where Zane has a very change in character. It should have given him PTSD. It should have given him very human emotions like we saw in the seasons prior, where he had to tackle them in a very unique way. But the fact is that he doesn't have that whatsoever. It doesn't get mentioned again until Crystallized. And that is where it gets worse. The Ice Emperor in Crystallized is one of my least favourite things in all of Ninjago, because, and I've stated this many times, the Ice Emperor is treated like it's a fundamental part of Zane in the Ice chapter itself. Zane's holographic technology goes on the fritz, and it switches him to the Ice Emperor, which re-gives him the Ice Emperor's personality. And this implies that the Ice Emperor is a fundamental aspect of Zane when it shouldn't. It should be the byproduct of the manipulation and the use of the Staff of Forbidden Spinjitzu, but they don't treat it like that. The problem is that they treat it like it's a fundamental aspect of Zane, like I said. And in that case, why isn't Zane dealing with these emotions? Why isn't Zane having PTSD? Why isn't Zane having a drawback from that? Why isn't he having that affect him? If the Ice Emperor is still within Zane, why is Zane not acknowledging it? So you can have it one of two ways. Either, like I said, have it be a product of Vex's influence and have Zane try and deal with that, or make it a fundamental part of the Ice Emperor and have Zane deal with that. But they don't do either, but they want to commit to one of them. It is by far the most flawed part of Zane's character in of itself. There is such a big potential with showing how Zane can act, how he can emote, how he can be human by using the Ice Emperor as the basis of it. But they just don't want to do that, and it really does not make any sense. And the fact is that he goes through the rest of the Wild Brain era up until the point of Dragon's Rising, just kind of coasting on nothing when they could have done something with it. He never even talks about how it affected him, how it impacted him, how it differed on his change of life. He doesn't do any of it, and not even any of the characters even ask about it. And from that point onwards, aka from season 12 till the end of Crystallize, he just delivers maybe some monologue about technology, maybe he forwards the plot in some way, but not in a way specific to him. It's just exposition, and he just kind of sits there when he's not doing that, and that is ultimately the issue, because Zane, who should be dealing with these interests and emotions like a human, like Zane in the earlier seasons would have, instead he treats himself like a machine, which we know is his biggest fear, but he still does it. And ultimately, this is where the downfall of Zane really did happen for me, because it shows that he lost what truly made him special, and the writers clearly didn't know how to handle him in that moment. So he never evolves, he never struggles, he never grows, he never has anything to do with any of these emotions that were very clearly set up for him, and that is ultimately the issue. And then again, it's worse, because then you get to stage 4, which is ultimately Dragon's Rising, and I wanted to wait for this video until season 3 part 1, and I'm honestly glad I did, because ultimately it just reinforces the issues that we actually have with Zane. Even though he is one of the core 6 ninja, one of the fundamental aspects of Ninjago, he is the only one of that 6 that has not been given any sort of significant plot in the actual event of Dragon's Rising. He has no significant narrative whatsoever. They kind of set it up with his journey to find Pixel, but ultimately it gets mentioned in a couple of episodes, and then he just gets her back, just out of nowhere. Of course, he appears with the ninja and he does help the ninja with the overarching plot, but Zane has nothing personal to him like literally everyone else does. He is there kind of just to, again, just kind of serve the narrative, maybe push the plot forward, maybe give some sort of technical jargon again. You know, he talks a lot about his scans, his detectors, you know, he's basically just saying about anything that's kind of ninja-y, but in terms of the actual human side of Zane, which we want to see, he never even does it. Like I said, he just has absolutely no arc. He has nothing to really challenge. He has no sort of personal stake. Even with Pixel, he barely had that. He was not making an active try and find Pixel. For example, obviously we get to see Nia and Kai try and make an effort to find Jay in Season 3 Part 1. Even though that plot was kind of irrelevant and stupid, they still show that they're trying. But the fact is that Zane just doesn't. And it's not even like he's doing it for any good reason. Because even with all these new characters that have popped up in Dragon's Rising, Aaron, Sora, Wildfire, Frack, Alfonso Rohiki, Alfonso is probably the closest to it, but he hasn't actually made any sort of significant relationship with any of them. There's not really any attempt. I mean, Season 3 Part 1, we have Zane that he thinks Sora's cooking is adequate because he has no taste buds. But ultimately, I think that's the only time I can recall the two actually interacting. So again, it just proves that he has just done nothing. He's still stagnant, he's still doing nothing, he's still such a static character, and the potential with Zane is truly there, but they're not using it. Now that he's got Pixel, he's just kind of just got her. Like, they share a couple scenes and that is basically about it. And now that he has found Pixel, even though he barely did anything to get her, he now actually has nothing. He truly has nothing to do, and that is honestly what concerns me the most. Because now we're in an era where Zane has basically become an unwritable character. He had the only thing, which was Pixel, driving him, and even then it was barely that. And now, like I said, we've got that. What are they going to do with Zane from here? And that is ultimately the thing that is concerning me, because even though one of the fundamental aspects of the show is still there, he very much isn't at the same time. And I do really think that the writers need to figure out what to do with him, because I'm really starting to get worried. So that is, in my opinion, how Zane progressed or digressed kind of through the years. Like I said, he started out as one of the most human parts of the show, and he has ended off as one of the most inhuman parts of the show, which is Zane's fear basically come to life. But how could they actually fix this? Now, if one thing above all else, give him something to do. He needs an objective, he needs a goal, he needs something to actually work towards. Or at the very least, he needs something that happens to him that actually kind of pushes that in the direction. And ultimately, all of that has to happen to do the true thing that needs to happen with Zane. And that is ultimately make him human again. Not in the literal sense, but in the sense of show that Zane has true emotion, show that Zane understands who he is, where he comes from, and what makes him so unique. Instead of just making him, by all accounts, an android, make him something that truly is his own personality, and make him something that truly makes him stand out from the bunch. But ultimately, I am scared that they are not going to do that, because ultimately, all these earlier amazing bits of character progression is now essentially being made fun of. I mean, let me put it best. In Season 3 Part 1, there is a scene where Zane is sat there with Xanth, and Xanth is sat there dancing with a bird. And I am going to quote Krusty, because he puts it best. Dragon's Rising is good, but this scene has convinced me that Zane is a totally unsalvageable character. And that, unfortunately, is the best summary of it, because the scene that made Zane so interesting, so curious, so full of emotion, so full of life, is now being made fun of and being discounted as, oh, I was just being weird at the time. And in my opinion, it is the biggest indicator that they truly don't know what to do with Zane, and they don't understand where Zane came from. But like I said, Zane is in dire need of a character rework. He is in dire need of something to drive him. He is in need of something to make his emotion come out and make him more human again. Because if they continue on this road, Zane's true fear of being nothing but a robot is truly going to come to life. Because in my opinion, in the Wild Brain era, and especially in Dragon's Rising, that has definitely become the case. Because Zane now more than ever has become not human. But that was my look at Zane, and that is how he needs to get better in the course of the show going forward. Because like I said, I am honestly very concerned about where Zane is going from here. I think Zane definitely needs something, because Zane for the longest time now has had absolutely nothing. And my hope is that the writers take some time to figure out what to actually do with Zane, because if it doesn't happen soon, I think Zane is truly going to be lost to us. And honestly, seeing that happen to one of the core 4 ninja is a bit of a shame to see. But let me know what you think of the character of Zane. Is he someone that you like? Is it someone that you dislike? Let me know how you feel either way. Do you disagree? Do you think Zane's in a good place? Do you think Zane is in a worse place than I've already described? I would love to hear your thoughts on the character, because he has definitely become a very interesting one over the course of time. And I want to make it clear that I do like the character of Zane. I do think he still has a lot of amazing moments, but they all kind of just come from the earlier seasons. And in recent time, I have definitely just become concerned by that fact. But like I said, let me know what you think of him, and thank you very much for watching. Take care. Okay,